While browsing on eBay, I saw an ad, "Save Henry Cavill's Dream Army." These miniatures will never see the tabletop if I keep them. What a shame! I couldn't let that pass. So naturally, compelled by my duty, I bought the army. I received, reassembled, cleaned and reprimed the entire army. And to challenge myself, I will paint all this army in just one day. On a Chaos Black primer, I base everything in Waplock bronze. I have a gold recipe that works really well with the airbrush. Personally, I love this. It looks like this. And it's very quick to do with the airbrush. Without an airbrush, it's doable, but honestly, much more longer and boring. So, a good base coat of Waplock bronze on the entire army, a bit time consuming, but normal. It's the foundation for all the gold for Custody's army. Once based, we'll move on to the major highlight with the airbrush using Retributor armor. Airbrushing provides a good amount of metallic pigments in the yellow. Since the gold is diluted in the airbrush, akin to applying several thin layers of gold. That's also why I said it's much simpler with the airbrush. However, I think applying a brush coat of Waplock bronze, clean and not too thick, and then doing zenithal strokes with Retributor spray could work, but it would require a light touch. I haven't tried it, so I can't promise anything, especially for those without an airbrush who want to reproduce the effect. It's important to project the gold up to about 45 degrees from the raw vertical angle, the zenith. And there you go! The airbrushed gold is done, and you can already see a nice little effect. There will be one or two more steps depending on the areas later. I continue the base coat with the airbrush, using the second most prominent color on the miniatures, red. I based it all in Mephiston red. For vehicles, I'll make the recesses red. In the end, I mostly follow the Forge World color scheme. For the Dreadnought, it will be the shoulder pad. And finally, for foot custodies, we'll have the helmet hair. I honestly don't know what it's called. We'll also have the loincloths between the legs and capes if applicable. I finished with the airbrush for now. We move on to what is perhaps the biggest step of the base coat with the brush, leather. We'll base all the Custody's gloves in Rhinox hide. For Custodian's guard, it's quite fast, but for the Venetary, it takes much longer. On the official artwork, they have a mix of black and brown for the leather, but since I wanted to paint it quickly, again, it's for playing, I prefer to base all the leather in Rhinox hide. Since we are on metallic paints, we need to dilute your base coat and apply at least 2, sometimes 3 layers, otherwise the reflection of the metallic pigments from the gold could show. And we don't want that at all. Even if leather can shine, it doesn't shine in the same way as gold. Not to mention that shiny brown next to shiny gold will not look good at all. Once finished, we move on to the second base coat with the brush. The weapons in Count Blue. And when I say weapons, I mean only the blades, unless if you want the pistol of your Venetary to be blue. Just like with Rhinox hide, dilute and apply as many layers as necessary to have a clean coat. Now it's time for Abaddon Black to enter in the scene. In black, we'll base the armor gaps and anything that could be metallic gray, like the metal, not the gold. This will give us a better base for the Leadbelcher leather. We'll also paint the handles of the weapon and other hand position in black. Now that my base coat are done, I can darken the entire miniature. For this, we go back to the airbrush and lightly dilute Black Templars contrast, applying it from below on the entire miniature. Still, try to emphasize the brown and red more than the gold. After all, it already has the Waplock bronze, but we will darken it a bit more nonetheless. Try not to be too heavy-handed. For vehicles, you can still let yourself go a bit to add contrast without any problems. Next, we will highlight the gold for the last time. we will use Stone Host Silver. Be careful not to put too much on your brush. When you take it from your palette, you can wipe it lightly on a tissue afterward. After all, we only want it on the edges, so it's more like a dry brush than a real highlight. This will make your gold much more vibrant without altering or desaturating it. Now, we will highlight the red with Cavill Sun Scarlet. Since we darkened it with black, it's enough in terms of highlight. We will start with a brush by highlighting the long cloth and helmet hair for foot custodies before moving on to the airbrush. For dreadnoughts, you'll notice that the inscription on their shoulder pads are carved in red instead of being gold. That's because redoing the gold in these small areas is less of hassle than the red around it. Don't hesitate to go for contrast. In painted armies for games, that's what gives the "Wow, it's amazing!" effect. And to be precise with the airbrush and not go over the gold, you can dilute your paint a bit more and lower the airbrush pressure. This will allow you to get closer and not go over. Finished with the red, we move on to highlighting the ladder with Tusker Fur, a paint that I really like. By applying it directly as a highlight on Rhinox eye, you quickly get a nice illuminated leather effect. You can dilute this paint and do it in 2 layers if you're not sure. Next, we will use a good dry brushing brush for the metallics. Since we've based everything in Abaddon Black, we can dry brush a lead becher and get a very good, clean and quick metallic effect. I'll use my big dry brushing brush for vehicles and a final one for the custodies. Try to avoid overflow as much as possible, but honestly, it's dry brushing, you're inevitably going to overflow. I also overflowed, and it doesn't show too much, especially with the next step. We will dry brush Stone Host Silver on the metals, but also on the gold. However, you can go quite strong on the metals for the contrast. Whereas on the gold, you'll need to be lighter. The gold effect is already good. Here, we're just giving it a bit more pep with the very vibrant Stone Host Silver. Now, we move on to highlighting the blades. For this, we will use a nice technique that has been increasingly used since the contrast appeared. We'll highlight tips of the blade with white. I do it with the brush to get a very smooth gradient quickly. It's possible with the brush, of course, but it takes much longer. Once everything is good in white, we can move on to the contrast with Thalassa Blue. I put it directly into the airbrush. Contrast is a very saturated paint. By applying thin layers like a glaze, we get a vibrant and saturated blue. You can go stronger with Thalassa Blue than I did and repeat this step with white on a smaller area. Then, go back with Thalassa Blue applying less pressure. And it gives a saturated gradient that almost goes to white and looks very nice. I didn't do it here because, as always, for the game, the effect font is more than enough. And there we go! We've done with painting the custodies. Now, let's move on to the base. And fortunately, for speed, my base scheme for my custodies is quite involved. I had the good idea to make marble slabs in rings with bricks. So here we go for all of that. Having a decent paint job on bases that stand out adds even more to the wow effect. However, the paint still needs to be reasonably clean and contrasted, otherwise it will just look odd. So I use cork for the bases. It's quite thick, but it elevates the custodies nicely. I glue it to the bases with super glue. Makes sense? Once I have my cork base for my base, I add accessories like plastic tubes or plastic H shapes to create a metal beam effect, but also texture plastic square plates to create slabs. Once I've placed these elements, I add small square pieces of wood that simulate bricks. I try to stack them staggered to create a destroyed wall effect. Once all the elements are glued, I reinforce the cork and texture everything with Vallejo texture. It's much cheaper than the GW one, and just as good. The drying time is relatively long, but then we can move on to the primer. I prime everything in chaos black, just like the miniatures. And painting the bases is quite simple. Surprisingly, I dry brush with blue-grey pale from Vallejo on the entire base to give this ruined city effect. If you don't have it, it also works with Administration Grey. Then, with the airbrush for speed or with a brush, paint the plastical slabs in Earthworn Grey. I then paint some bricks in Corn Red. Not all, because I want my bricks to be a mix of dark red and black. I then highlight them with Evanescent Scarlet, and you can almost stop there if you want. My other custodies have veins in the marble, so I found myself obligated to do them too. For this, I will dilute some vermin first strongly and apply it as randomly as possible. I just make the veins in the same direction, but other than that, it's really free and random. Once they're dry, I will use this very fine tipped pen to define the veins even more with a nice black line inside the Storm Vermin Fur line. And to finish, I'll paint the metallic parts in iron wires. And there we go! It's finished! And that's what my new custodies look like. Finishing off my army. This army can be used for both 40k and Horus Heresy. That's what's great about custodies. And that's what the army looks like overall. We have the right mass effect that I was looking for. I am very happy with it. Thanks for watching! Please subscribe, and if you want to see me do something similar. In this video I painted $2,000 of Space Marines.